The first week at Ridgeview High was already overwhelming for 17-year-old Mara Hale, who had just transferred from a quiet rural school where everyone knew everyone else's ancestors back 3 generations. Ridgeview, by contrast, was a roaring metropolis of a school. 4 floors, 800 students, and hallways that felt more like poorly managed airport terminals than academic corridors. Mara moved through them cautiously, clutching the map the guidance counselor had given her, constantly adjusting her steps to avoid collision. She had never been the sort of person to demand space. She preferred to slip quietly around others, a shadow that left no ripple. But in the frenzy of that second-period rush, when the bell shrieked and hundreds poured into the hall, she found herself pinned between a locker and an avalanche of bodies. The noise, the shoving, the slamming of metal doors, it all blurred together, and she forced steady breaths, reminding herself that the discomfort would pass. New schools always required a period of adaptation. What she did not expect, however, was that adaptation would come in the form of a confrontation she neither invited nor desired, one that would test not only her resolve but her restraint, one that would echo across the school long after the bruises faded. Among Ridgeview's unwritten laws was a silent hierarchy, one everyone seemed to obey without needing explicit instructions. At the top was a cluster of students whose reputations preceded them in whispers and warnings. Central among them was Briar Knox, a girl whose presence could hush a hallway. She was tall, athletic, and carried herself with a confidence that bordered on entitlement. No one dared challenge her, not because she was popular in the traditional sense, but because she was feared. Some said she'd been suspended twice for fighting. Others claimed she'd once broken a boy's nose for bumping her shoulder. The truth was probably somewhere in the middle, but the important part was that she moved through school like a storm cloud. Wherever she passed, students parted. That morning, Mara, not yet fluent in the hallway politics, happened to be standing still in the exact wrong place. The center lane Briar considered her personal walkway. Mara had paused only long enough to compare classroom numbers, squinting at her map, unaware she was blocking the infamous path. Students who noticed her standing there stared in disbelief, a few even stepping back as if anticipating a lightning strike. And Briar, seeing the unfamiliar figure in her space, strode forward with a scowl that foretold trouble. "Move," Briar said, one word, sharp as a snapped twig. Mara looked up, startled but not afraid, unsure whether the command was even directed at her. She opened her mouth to ask for directions, but before she could form a syllable, Briar's fist crashed into her shoulder with brutal force. The impact spun her sideways, slamming her into the lockers hard enough that pain shot down her arm. Gasps rippled across the hallway. Briar didn't shout, didn't posture. She simply glared down at Mara like she had swatted a fly. "I said move," she repeated, as if violence were the most natural punctuation. Mara's heart thudded in her chest, not from fear, but from disbelief. Back at her old school, disagreements rarely escalated beyond snippy comments or passive-aggressive notes left in lockers. Physical aggression, especially unprovoked, was unheard of. For a moment, Mara considered doing what most others did: lower her head, apologize, and squeeze past Briar to avoid further trouble. But something inside her, something she rarely allowed to surface, tightened like a drawn bowstring. She straightened slowly, eyes locking with Briar's. The hallway vibrated with anticipation. No one had ever looked directly at Briar like that, let alone after being struck. Mara wasn't a fighter in the conventional sense, but her father, a former military hand-to-hand instructor, had taught her self-defense principles, not to win fights, but to end threats. "You don't start anything," he always said, "but you finish what someone else insists on continuing." His lessons echoed now as Briar stepped closer, clearly expecting Mara to crumble. Instead, Mara took one controlled breath, grounding her weight. Briar's eyes narrowed, perhaps surprised the new girl hadn't burst into tears or scurried away. "What?" Briar scoffed. "You think you're tough? Move." When Briar shoved her again, attempting to force her aside, Mara responded with a single, precise motion. She pivoted, cupped Briar's wrist, and used the bully's forward momentum to redirect her. It was not a dramatic martial arts spectacle, just a clean, efficient counterstrike meant to neutralize. Briar stumbled, shocked, losing her balance and landing squarely on the tile floor. The fall echoed like a dropped textbook. The hallway froze completely. A dozen cell phones lifted. Briar, who had never been so much as nudged without delivering retribution, stared up at Mara with a mixture of fury and disbelief. But for the first time, she also looked uncertain. What surprised Mara more than Briar's fall was the silence that followed. No jeers, no cheers, just the collective intake of breath from a student body witnessing the laws of their social ecosystem being rewritten. Mara didn't advance on Briar or gloat. She simply backed away a step, hands lowered, making it clear she wasn't seeking a fight. "Don't hit people," she said quietly, her voice steady despite her pounding pulse. Briar scrambled to her feet, face flushed with humiliation and anger. For a terrifying heartbeat, it seemed as if she would lunge again. But then she hesitated. She had strength, yes, but she had never fought someone who didn't fear her, and fear had always been her greatest weapon. With a crowd watching, phones recording, and her pride already bleeding at the edges, she weighed her choices. If she attacked and lost, the myth of Brian Knox would shatter completely. If she walked away, she could claim indifference, or at least regroup. After several seconds that felt like forever, Briar dusted herself off, spat a curse, and shoved through the crowd, leaving behind a trail of stunned faces. It was not a retreat she wanted, but it was the only one that preserved even a sliver of her reputation. In the aftermath, the story burned through Ridgeview like wildfire. Some exaggerated it into a full martial arts showdown. Others insisted Briar had slipped and Mara had simply stepped aside. The truth, however, lay somewhere quieter, in the calculated precision of a girl who preferred peace but refused to tolerate cruelty. Mara hadn't intended to make a name for herself, yet by the end of the day, teachers were whispering her name, students were approaching her with cautious awe, and the principal called her into the office, though not to punish her. Several students had submitted videos that clearly showed Briar striking first. Mara was commended for her restraint, advised on school policy, and quietly thanked for revealing what many had endured silently. In the weeks that followed, Briar's dominance waned noticeably. She still walked with confidence, but the edge of menace had dulled. Students no longer leapt aside out of reflex. As for Mara, she found herself gradually becoming part of the school fabric, not because she fought, but because she stood firm. She never threw another punch. She never needed to. Her quiet strength spoke louder than force ever could, and in time, Ridgeview High came to respect not just the girl who stood her ground, but the principle behind her counterstrike, that dignity is worth defending, even if you defend it only once.